What's going on, everyone? So welcome to another video of mine. This is of course me focusing on the 1930s Academy Award Best Picture winners, ranked worst to best. Now, I've already focused on the 1920s, and obviously after this video, the next focus will be on the 1940s, but guys, this is the first decade in which there was 10 Academy Award Best Picture winners. The 1920s only had 3 because the Academy Awards was originally created in 1927, which is obviously later on in the decade for the 1920s. So, for the 1930s, I'm going to be doing it where my number 10 pick is the worst, and number 1 is the best. So, all that exposition aside, let's get into it. Oh, and keep in mind, I'm not going to go in depth with every single one of these movies. Some I might do a little bit more than others, but it's fine. It's a ranking video. So, all that exposition aside, let's get into it. So, my number 10 is Grand Hotel, which is easily one of the worst Best Picture winners I've seen. I really didn't like this movie. It's just a vignette of characters just doing things. That's the best explanation I have. I really didn't like this movie. It has not aged well. I'm kind of curious if me as a viewer, if watching 1930s, if I would have liked it. I'm not sure. But 90 years later, I really don't like this movie, and that's why it's my number 10. My number 9 is Sabourin, which is one of the first, actually no, I think it is the first Western to win Best Picture. And I respect it on that regards, but everything else about this movie, I just really did not like. A lot of it comes down to, I think it's more of a stylistic movie, and the thing is, I'm pretty sure it hasn't even gotten a Blu-ray release. If not, I just couldn't find it, and I wasn't going to be paying like 20-some bucks for it. But my copy that I watched, the quality really wasn't that good, and I just feel like, because it's such a movie that's based on the style, I feel like because I wasn't able to get a visual presentation of it that was good, I wasn't the biggest fan of that. But a lot of times you can watch a movie and it might not have a great transfer, but if the story, characters, and pacing really help out, then you'll be able to still enjoy it. But none of that worked for me. I found this movie to be quite dull, honestly, and my level of respect is just on the fact that it's the first Western to win Best Picture. Yeah, unfortunately, that's where my respect ends. That's why it's my number 9. My number 8 is The Life of Emile Zola, which is one of the latest Best Picture winners that I finally got around to watching. I don't know. I think that this movie has some interesting ideas for sure, but I couldn't help but feel as though those ideas kind of got lost under the huge cast of characters. More importantly, I felt like this movie did indulge itself a lot. It's not like art house where it's like art house indulgent. It's more like mainstream indulgence where it's the style of filmmaking that was during this time. It was very rampant where you had like a huge cast of characters and you just had them like do things that really didn't really adhere to the plot or characters. They just did things. And this is one of those examples of a movie where there's just characters that do things, much in the same way as like Grand Hotel. And yeah, I'm not a fan of it. I'm really not a fan of that kind of style. I don't know. But it's something that would later creep on into the 1940s and 50s in some regards. But we'll get into that, you know, the 40s and 50s videos. But that was, of course, my number 8. My number 7 is Cant, which it's very similar to Life of Emile Zola in those regards, where it has a huge cast of characters. They don't really do much, and then in some regards, with what little they do, it doesn't really help out with the messages or the storytelling. I was dulled by this movie as well. It's a shame because, again, with the cast, you would think that it would be, you know, more in terms of like having a meaty script, but the script is very bare bones, and I feel like even the bare bones of it just really didn't fascinate me. And I wanted to be fascinated, I really did, but alas, here I am saying I wasn't fascinated by it. And that's why it's my number 7. My number 6 is The Great Ziegfeld. Oh, The Great Ziegfeld. So this might be where I explain a little bit more than the other entries. The Great Ziegfeld is a movie that it is overlong, for sure. It's almost 3 hours long, and it feels its length. However, it has some really interesting messages and ideas, I personally felt. And because of that, it's why I give it like a middle-of-the-road rating. All the other ones I've been disappointed by, but I give it middle-of-the-road because the ideas that this movie and the aspect that it's focusing on, I do think it is ambitious in those regards. Could it have been cut by like an hour? Absolutely. But the fact that it was this long and it took its time with some of these ideas, I really did think that that was fascinating, but by no means is it a good movie. I would never sit here and say that it's a good movie, but I will say that I do respect with the ideas it was tackling, especially during this time period. Again, I'm not going to recommend it, but I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. It's definitely a middle-of-the-road movie, but it's a movie that here on this list, it's kind of perfect. The fact that I give it a middle-of-the-road rating, and it's middle of the road pretty much in this ranking list, so it's pretty cool. Excuse me. So that was, of course, my number 6. My number 5 is Mutiny on the Bounty, which I love it when a movie takes place on a boat. There's just something interesting about it in terms of atmosphere, but I thought this movie was okay. I liked some of the sword fighting. I liked some of the banner. The acting is good. I personally felt that for sure. But I do feel as though the movie does test your patience a lot. The build-up is pretty slow, and I like slow build-up. I don't want people to get the wrong impression that I just don't like slow-building movies. I do, but I feel as though there has to be some form of direction to where it's going to a certain point, and I feel like this movie does it, but it doesn't do it in a way that really interested me. And I haven't seen the remakes of this movie, so maybe the remakes did it better, but at the same time, this movie did win Best Picture, so I feel like maybe this will be the best adaptation, but I don't know. I'm curious to see, how the remakes handle it, but I don't know. It's okay. It's not a bad movie by any means. It's just not a movie where I was impressed by, but I still respect it to some extent. And yeah, that's why it's my number 5. So now we get to the top 4. My number 4 is All Quiet on the Western Front, which I know a lot of people would have it as their number 1 probably, and I totally get that. This is a movie that I do think it's a little too long, but I like the fact that it's one of the first war movies. And more importantly, it's not like Sabourin where it's one of the first genre movies to win like Best Picture. It's more like All Quiet on the Western Front is focusing on World War I, like a little bit after that. So it's still fresh in a lot of people's minds. And more importantly, how it handles PTSD was interesting. Again, I do think that this movie is a little too long, but I do think that with its ideas and ambitions, they do fascinate me to some extent. And it's why if someone were to say that this is one of the favorite war films, I totally get it. It's not top 10 for me, but it is definitely a movie that I respect, and I can see why it won Best Picture, for sure. And that's why it's my number 4. My number 3 is actually the last entry in which I could say, seen every Best Picture winner, You Can't Take It With You. This is like a screwball comedy, and it's funny watching it now because if you were to watch this now after seeing every single comedy of the 2010s and 2000s, you'd be like, wow, this movie is really cliche. But it's not, because it came out 90 years ago. So a lot of times you have to put yourself in the perspective of watching this from when this movie came out. I was able to do that, but it wasn't until the end, because I'm not going to lie, the first half I was like, I've seen this before, but it wasn't until the last half where I was like, Chad, don't be an idiot. Literally think about it. This is a movie that came out 90 years ago. This was probably one of the first movies to do that. And I looked it up, and lo and behold, it is. So I got to give it props for that. More importantly, I do think that there were some pretty humorous moments. I do think that there were some outlandish things that, I get it, it's a comedy, so sometimes that happens. But there were some outlandish moments where I was kind of like, I don't know about that. But still, I respect it. I like that James Stewart was in it. He gave a good performance. Typically, the movie did have its share of funny moments. And I do think overall the messages were interesting. The discussion about government and control with that, pretty fascinating. And, with today's government, it is kind of interesting and relevant. So I do have to say, watching this movie, even 90 years later, it was very fascinating on that regards. Not a great movie, not Frank Capra's best, but it's definitely a movie that I respect, and funny enough, there's going to be another Frank Capra movie in my top 2. But let's move forward. I'm not going to spoil my number 1. But my number 2 is Gone with the Wind. So Gone with the Wind is a very long movie. It's a very, very, very long movie. It's almost 4 hours, and it's, keep in mind, 1930s pacing. So it feels long. But the thing is, it's so well acted, it's so ambitious in its scope. From what I've heard, I know people that read the book, apparently it is pretty accurate to the book. And then it also has some pretty famous dialogue, very well shot. It's got a grand scope. This is, of course, before CGI, so there was all practical effects. I respect them on all those levels. However, as Black Klansman, which, let me get that out. As Black Klansman showed, Gone with the Wind is pretty much like, it's a love letter to Southern culture, and the 1930s especially. It's just very fascinating that it's like, yeah, but it's a love letter to everything Southern, and everything Southern in this time period with what it's focusing on, Civil War, it has to do with slavery. So it's almost like, I don't want to say pro-slavery, but it does get that feeling of like, oh my goodness, this is like, I can't believe they're focusing on this in this kind of way. So in those regards, I do think it hasn't aged well, and as Spike Lee said in Black Klansman, pretty much, it's so true. It hasn't aged 100% well, but there are a lot of aspects of this movie that I do respect. And I love Black Klansman, by the way, but I had to get that out of the way because when I think of Gone with the Wind now, I immediately think of Black Klansman and all the things that it said about Gone with the Wind, and it's so true. And I didn't think about that perspective before, but I still respect Gone with the Wind. I think it's a movie that it's a time capsule into like this is what Americans were thinking about during this time period. I do think that it would not win Best Picture nowadays, and it's not because it's a bad movie. It's just because some of the messages and themes haven't really aged that well. But again, it's still a movie I respect a lot of. I am going to give it a second watch soon because I haven't seen this movie in like 8 years. I know it's a long time, but it's still a movie I still remember everything. And then, you know, Black Klansman has been putting it really fresh in my mind with the themes and everything. I'm like, all right, it's a movie that it's not going to take my #1 spot because of that. But my #1, I think, has aged really well. It's the second Frank Capra movie on this list. And my #1 is It Happened One Night. I think this movie's aged really well. It's definitely a movie that, out of all these movies, I think it's gotten the best transfer too. It's on Blu-ray. I say it even has a better transfer than Gone with the Wind, and that's because it's on like Criterion. The thing is with It Happened One Night is that it is such a really well-crafted romantic comedy. It doesn't deal with the themes of like Gone with the Wind. Like Gone with the Wind, you could argue that it's almost like a movie about like, you know, a romantic abuseful relationship. It Happened One Night's not like that. It is a wholesome movie, but it's also a movie that deals with themes of like, you know, poor guy, rich girl. It's one of the first of those movies, and I feel like it does it in such a really unique way that even if you were to watch it years later, like 9 years later, it's still a movie that's aged like a fine wine. I am looking forward to rewatching this movie. I haven't seen it in a couple years, but I saw it several times when I was younger, and even as a teenager I did watch it, and I liked it. That's honestly why it's my #1. It's not really a nostalgia trip, it's just a movie that I know out of these 10 movies that it is easily my favorite of the lot. Frank Capra is a really good director. I do like him. Maybe I'll do a ranking list of him. I don't know. Stay tuned for that. I don't know though. But yeah, what I almost forgot to mention about the 1930s is that the Great Depression was in full swing. You know, after 1929, there was a full swing Great Depression in America, as many of you know. But the thing is, that changed a lot of people's minds. So like cinemas, people went there and they wanted to forget about their problems. So they tried to have it in movies where they didn't deal with those issues at all. Which is why a lot of these 1930s Best Picture winners are very light and fluffy, in my opinion. I feel like after the Great Depression ended, that is when movies kind of had to deal with more serious issues. And with the 1940s Best Picture winners, you'll start to notice that. But I just found it fascinating. I wanted to say that. That's why I feel like a lot of these movies are disappointing style over substance movies. I feel like during this time period, yes, it made sense because there was literally a huge depression and recession. But when watching it now, it's kind of like, this hasn't aged well in the slightest. So that's my little thoughts about the 1930s in terms of Best Picture winners. But yeah, guys, that's my ranking of the 1930s Best Picture winners, worst to best. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. I know a lot of you are probably like, I haven't even heard of half of these. That's fine. I'm sure I'll get some comments that are like, oh, you should have ranked it this on this, but whatever. It's my ranking list. I'm curious to hear your guys though in the comment section down below. And also, again, stay tuned for the 1940s. That will be coming up next. And as always, don't forget the subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.